Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Hi, I'm Gabe Lyons. Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. And man, we are fresh off of our event, Q&A. And it was amazing. We had so many great people come to Nashville and be a part of conversations. I know so many of you listened in. You had virtual passes. You were part of our town hall, asking your questions to these leaders. I mean, we had everybody from Christine Kane and John Tyson, John Mark Comer, to Jenny Allen, Annie Downs, Curt Thompson, Scott Sauls, David Bailey, so many, Micah Edmondson. I mean, we had these conversations going, and people had never heard Q do that before. I mean, we took an hour and 15 minutes to dig deep into conversations like mental health and suicide, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so what we wanted to do today is give you a chance to hear a taste of it. We're going to bring you a conversation just fresh off of the stage where you can hear a dialogue between Curt Thompson and Scott Sauls and Rebekah Lyons talking about mental health. Now, Scott Sauls is a pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church. He's dealt with his own bouts of depression, and as a senior leader of a church, all that goes with trying to lead a church while keeping your mental health in order. And then Curt Thompson, the author of a great book called The Soul of Shame, who's also a psychiatrist and counsels people, and he brings that counseling wisdom into this conversation on how we can think well and better understand suicide and mental health. And then Rebekah Lyons, of course, author of Rhythms of Renewal and so many books that helped really expose over the last decade the need to talk about our panic attacks, anxiety, depression, and our mental health in general as Christians. And so you're going to get to hear a piece of that conversation we've excerpted for you today. I hope you enjoy it. But what I really want you to do is I want you to go get all of these 8 conversations. We had 8 different dialogues. We talked about everything from censorship and conspiracy theories to prayer and revival. We have this mental health conversation. We talked about race and justice. We talked with Sadie Robertson about the next generation, and we talked about discipleship. So there's all these hour and 15-minute long dialogues where we go deep into the moment and what does it mean to lead right now in this current cultural moment, and what's it going to be like to lead in 2021. So you can learn about that. Go look at all the conversations we had, who they were with at qideas.org/QA, so the simple letters QA. And when you do that, we're discounting the price of what that virtual pass was when it was live in real time and you could participate in half. So it's only $49, and that gives you access to all 8 of these conversations through our Q Media platform. So check it out. We hope you enjoy this part of the conversation and then enjoy the entire thing. So let's listen in now. So welcome, and thank you for being with us for such an important dialogue this morning. I know we're starting with this heavy topic, and the reason we wanted to start with this at Q&A is if we get into a bunch of different more cultural issues that are of concern, I think everybody walks into the room already feeling the heaviness of that. But as we sit here this morning, I want to focus on stepping way back and going, how are we as people of God to approach these topics of mental health concern, depression, anxiety, panic attacks? And so I'm going to introduce each of you as we go through. I'm going to ask each of you a first question. But Curt Thompson, who's a psychiatrist, somebody who really understands the neuroscience behind how we think, how our brain is wired, how it works. I think that's important for us as leaders to understand what's happening on the neuro side. Who's also written amazing books, one called The Soul of Shame that has had quite an impact on so many leaders, where you've really unpacked how shame starts to work and why that becomes such an important item that we have to talk about. We can't park that in the dark. And so, Curt, I just want to start with you with this question. As you think about leaders right now joining us, church leaders, pastors, the people who are with us in this room, who've been through a pretty difficult year where our mental health has been more challenged. It was already challenged, and now it's increasingly been challenged. As you think about leaders who come into a space like this today, and they're already feeling down, they're already walking in, maybe depressed, maybe in a place where they're like, I can't lead anybody right now. I'm not in a good place. How would you offer hope, even as we enter into this conversation, about what you've seen God do in leaders' lives when they walk into a place like this and go, okay, I'm going to be open. I'm going to try to better understand what's happening in my brain, what's happening in my body as we begin this conversation?
Well, thanks, Gabe. I think one of the things that we talk about in neuroscience is that, science gives us ideas about the mechanics of what we do, but it doesn't really give us the meaning behind the mechanics. It doesn't really tell us why or what the purpose of these mechanics are. And one of the first things that I do is to invite people to really go back to the foundational texts. What does it mean for us to be human? For us to be human, at the end of the second chapter of Genesis, we see that the man and the woman were naked and they were unashamed. That for us to be human is to be deeply known for the purpose of creating beauty. That's our purpose. And so we do that by being differentiated from others, and those differentiated parts coming together in places of great vulnerability and in the absence of shame. So differentiation, vulnerability, and in the absence of shame. And one of the things that I think that evil wields is this notion, first of all, of isolation, right? We have, and this isolation began long before COVID. I mean, it begins in Genesis in many respects. And so for those who are here and wondering, what can I do about where I am? The first question that I would have is, who are the people who are coming to find you? Because we don't regulate our emotional states, we don't regulate our depression, we don't regulate our anxiety without the help of somebody else's brain. I need that. And of course we'd say, well, yeah, but it feels kind of shaming for me to say, hey, I can't get my crap together. Can you help a brother? It's not like, I'm guessing that most people didn't walk in today looking for somebody. That's the first thing that you say. But that is actually what we need all the time. I need someone coming to find me all the time. And so I would ask that question, who are the people who are coming to find us? Because isolation, I think, is the single most important thread of all of what we're seeing that is so debilitating about our culture long before COVID, and now with COVID, that much more accentuated. And asking for someone to come to find us is an act of great vulnerability, because it does acknowledge that I need you to help me. Yeah. But I don't just need you to help me. I need you in order for us actually to create together. I want to go beyond just not being sick. I actually want to be creative. And so then the other question becomes, who are the people that we see that we're going to help? And by pastors, I'm asking those, who are the pastors that others in this room are going to go find? Yeah. Pastors are going to find people all the time. The question that I would have, who are the people who are coming to find them? And we can talk more about that. Yeah, that's crucial.
Well, let's go to Scott, because Scott, you're a pastor. This has been your journey for a couple decades now. You've also authored a couple just prolific books, Jesus Outside the Lines, and most recently A Gentle Answer, which has been so timely for this season for Christians to really understand what does it mean to have a gentle answer in a culture that's kind of built on harsh rhetoric. But as a pastor, you hear Curt talk, and we have so many pastors and church leaders here, it feels like the pastor's the one that many times is trying to meet the needs of everybody else and don't always have somebody that they can go to. How does that feel as a pastor when you hear Curt say that and you process that through your own journey? I know you've walked out a depression journey where you've talked very openly and transparently about that. But how important is what Curt just said for any leader in this room about the need for a pastor to have a person that they can go to?
It's very important what Curt is saying, and it's confounding how you get there. We were talking, before we came up on stage about a teacher when I was in seminary. One of the professors said, "Don't expect to have people in your church that care for you." And I thought, that's ridiculous. That's just absurd. And after doing this for 30 years, I understand it. I'm still fighting against that counsel because I believe that God has made us to be mutually and reciprocally found, right? But over the years, to the point, I can't tell you how many times I've heard church members say, nobody from the church pursued me. I disappeared, and nobody pursued me. Nobody talks to me. I've never heard a single person. I've never heard a pastor say that. And yet it's completely true about every pastor, that oftentimes we feel lonely in our own communities. And I think this year, case in point, 2020, with all that 2020 has done to church life, you've got this dynamic where reality is 70% of pastors right now around America are looking for another job. 70. That's pretty staggering.
70%.
I can't remember if that's Barna or Tom Rayner, but it's data. 70% are looking for other work right now. And the dynamic, I've tried to even explain this to church members, and they're like, huh? And I'm like, I guess you have to be in it in order to really understand it. Our dynamic is that essentially the feeling is that 60% of our people have ghosted us for the last 7 months, right? And our people feel like they're still with us because they can see us and hear us from their living rooms, right? And yet we just have this complete void of relationship. And I think what church people don't realize, and I don't know if this is typically an American issue or a global church issue, but church members, especially in a city like Nashville, where there's all this church hopping, and what's the it church of the year, and we're going to go to the it church of the year, and then we'll go to another one next year, and so on. People oftentimes, not everybody, but oftentimes people treat the church as a consumer good, and we see the church as our family. This is our people, right? And so the dynamic of loneliness and isolation is amplified in a time like this, because you start to feel like, gosh, are we really a community? Because wouldn't I be hearing from people? You hear church members say, well, nobody pursued me, and then, but a pastor can't say, why isn't anybody pursuing us? Why isn't anybody asking how we're doing? Complaining in the church is way up. Just the negativity of the environment oftentimes gets taken out on your caregivers, and that includes therapists, it includes pastors and others. And so it really is the perfect emotional storm right now for pastors. And so whoever that community is, whether it's your staff team or whether it's a therapist or just a friend outside your church, even if you need that community and kind of fighting against isolation is utterly essential. So.
I know that's just like a little bit of a tease there, but such a good conversation. I think about Curt Thompson describing, for us to be human is to be deeply known for the purpose of creating beauty. There's a lot loaded in that statement, but so essential for us to understand. And then he said also, this isolation began long before COVID. It begins in Genesis in many respects. Do you remember that? I think that's what is helpful for us to understand, that we feel isolated because as human beings, we are isolated. And it's our relationship with God that actually starts to ground us and root us. But then our pursuit of connection with others is really otherworldly. It's countercultural. It's easier to kind of move away from people and move into isolation. But it brings so much love and energy and excitement and enthusiasm and health when we move towards people. So I hope today, if you're a pastor or a leader, or maybe you're just part of a church, that your empathy meter went up today, that you started to get a sense of how other people carry these burdens, carry these loads. And if you're one that's been walking through mental health, I hope you're just encouraged to know how to think well about that, but also some practical ways that you can see that improve. But then if you're somebody who this hasn't been your journey, but you know people who have, or you're in a church, pray for your pastor today. Reach out and encourage them. Pick up the phone, leave an email, do something to just let them know the impact they're having on your life. Encourage them. It's been a hard year for a lot of pastors, and I think it's important that we encourage and reach out to them. So if you want to watch this entire hour and 15 conversation, including questions from many of you in our audience about this topic of mental health and suicide, you can sign on at qideas.org/QA. It's discounted so that you can have access to this and the other 7 topics we discussed just this past week. I hope you enjoy it, and we hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving.